Ever since his first fight against Islam Makhachev, it seems as though Arman Tsarukyan's been on a mission to avenge this loss. The first time these two met, it was Tsarukyan's debut, and after some ridiculously high-level grappling exchanges, people thought they'd see this fight again and that a title would be on the line. 6 years later, these two are booked in to headline UFC 311 at the beginning of 2025, and it's clear that both fighters are much evolved since the first time they met, and I cannot wait for this one. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at where both fighters are heading into this fight, their strengths, their weaknesses, and then I'm going to end the video with a prediction. I think we should start by talking about the challenger Arman Tsarukyan, as he is the focus of this video, how he's on the mission to dethrone Islam Makhachev. And when we look at his strengths, I think it's clear at this point he's such a well-rounded fighter. His striking, to say that he was a real grapple-heavy guy at the start of his UFC career, we can see in real time how much his striking's developed. And I think the climax of that was his knockout against Beneil Dariush. I think heading into this fight, people thought that it was either going to be Dariush knocking Tsarukyan out or Tsarukyan taking it to a decision. And for Arman to knock him out so early on in that fight just showed how many improvements he'd made to his striking. And look, people forget, at that point Beneil Dariush was still a real contender in the lightweight division. Yes, he'd had losses before, but he was still in the ascendancy, really up there amongst it. People have short memories when it comes to contenders after they've had a couple of losses, but make no mistake, this wasn't meant to be an easy fight for Tsarukyan. I love the way that he's really light on his feet. He doesn't waste anything with his punches. He's very precise and uses them to get in on takedowns. And as we take that seamless segue into talking about Tsarukyan's grappling, I think it's obvious, everyone knows at this point, Tsarukyan is an elite grappler. There was a video recently with him wrestling against Khamzat Chimaev, and despite the obvious weight disparity between the two, technically you could see that Tsarukyan has all the tools to make it competitive with the very best wrestlers in the UFC. Before we get onto his offensive wrestling, I think his takedown defense is something that does deserve a mention. His balance is almost like nothing I've ever seen before in the UFC. In his fight against Mateusz Gamrot, fight that he did lose, Gamrot got really deep with some of his single leg attempts, and Arman Tsarukyan was able to keep balance on one leg, prevent the takedown. He did get taken down in that fight. Gamrot is, again, one of the better wrestlers in the division, but his scrambles, his takedown defense just showed that he is one of the very best in this sport. And I don't think that his two losses in the UFC, to Islam Makhachev and Mateusz Gamrot, can really detract from his wrestling credentials, because both of these fights were really good back and forth wrestling exchanges. He took both the guys down, he got taken down, there were loads of scrambles. If you are into your scrambles and high level wrestling, these two fights are absolute must watches. I think I actually gave Tsarukyan the nod against Gamrot. I definitely think that Makhachev won their fight, but I do think that Tsarukyan just edged it against Gamrot, despite what the judges thought. But anyway, looking at Arman Tsarukyan as a whole, where his strengths lie, he is very, very well rounded at this point. Yes, he used to be more wrestling heavy, but he's so light on his feet, he's got so precise with his striking that it's made his takedowns even more dangerous. So his overall game has improved a lot since his first fight against Islam Makhachev, but I still have identified a couple of vulnerabilities that have cost him fights in the past, and I think they could play a part in this fight here. Firstly, it's to do with his lack of concentration. I feel at times that Tsarukyan does switch off occasionally. The first one that springs to mind is a trip that Islam Makhachev was able to land on him in their first fight. It was when Tsarukyan was a bit too comfortable engaging in the clinch. He wasn't really paying attention to trips and things like that, and Makhachev was able to get him down far too easily. Now, there's no shame in getting tripped by Islam Makhachev, so it might sound harsh that I'm calling him out for this, but I've seen it happen a few times in his fights. I even think that when he put himself in vulnerable positions against Charles Oliveira, that was occasionally him getting too comfortable, not really being switched on, and Oliveira was able to get him in a few bad positions. Don't forget, that fight ended with Tsarukyan in a D'Arce choke. He wasn't quite saved by the bell, but it definitely didn't look good for the judges. And this leads on to the second thing that I've noticed from Tsarukyan that definitely won't help him out if it does go to a decision. I do want to point out that Tsarukyan is still a young fighter. He's only 28. When he lost to Makhachev, he was 22, 23. That's such a young age to be fighting on the elite level. Even his loss against Gamrot, he was 25. And I'm not taking anything away from his opponents in those fights. They were both close fights, but the judges scored it for his opponents. But I do think a lack of experience played a part in these losses, and they could even still be playing a part now. The reason I say this is because in fighting, whether it's boxing or MMA, Oftentimes you need to have those moments that the judges can look to award you the rounds. I was speaking about the Shavkat Rakhmonov and Ian Gary fight at the weekend, and Shavkat landing those 2 big shots in rounds 1 and 2 could have been enough to win him those fights. I think when you're experienced, when you're quite a smart fighter as well, you can realise that this round is really even and then do something that optically pleases the judges and win those fights. I feel like Tsarukyan in both the Makhachev fight and the Gamrot fight didn't do anything to cause those moments that would give the judges pause to think, okay, this round was close, but I just want to give it to Tsarukyan. Again, with a fighter who's got so many strengths, it's hard to pick out the weaknesses, but these are a couple of things that I have noticed. It is a lack of concentration at times that fighters can capitalise on. Islam Makhachev is a master at capitalising on fighters making mistakes. You've got to think about the Charles Oliveira fight, that careless knee that Charles Oliveira leapt into. Islam Makhachev stayed composed and caught him with a left hook that led to the end of that fight. Makhachev will wait for you to make a mistake and he will capitalise on it, which is why Tsarukyan needs to be so concentrated in this fight. And then if you're looking at the experience, Tsarukyan needs to make sure that he's causing these moments that catch the judges' eyes for him to be awarded those rounds. I think there is a high chance that this fight does go to a decision. That's not my final prediction, that'll be coming at the end of the video, but there is a high chance this fight does go to a decision. So Tsarukyan needs to make sure that when the moments happen in this fight, he's the one initiating them and it's not all Islam Makhachev. Before we get on to talking about his opponent, the champion Islam Makhachev, I'm going to ask that you subscribe to my channel, drop a like on this video, let me know how you think this fight's going to go down, and also I will be doing a technical breakdown of their first fight where we write on the screen, draw arrows and whatnot, pick out what both fighters did well there, and if there's anything we can learn from that going into this fight. But anyway, let's talk about Islam Makhachev. And look, going into this fight, he's the #1 pound for pound fighter on the planet. How much more can you say? He's just looked so good. Apart from a wobbly moment against Volkanovski, his ascendancy has been pretty flawless. There was that one loss on his record where he got knocked out early on in his career. And I actually thought after that, his stand-up game was quite cagey. It's hard to imagine now because he looks so full of confidence. He really imposes himself on fights. But really, during his ascendancy, he wasn't throwing too much. He was pretty conscious of overextending himself and getting caught. But now his striking has come on leaps and bounds. Going toe-to-toe with Dustin Poirier like that, grinding him down, getting a submission in the final round, just shows what kind of improvements he's made. He wasn't desperately shooting for takedowns. He was more than happy to stand toe-to-toe with Dustin Poirier, who many people have said for years has been one of the better boxers in the UFC. I know that for years, even before he became champion, Khabib and his gym, aka, they all said that Islam Makhachev's striking was world class. But until he became champion, we just hadn't seen that. But since he's become champion, we've seen against Oliveira, against Poirier, some of the most dangerous strikers in lightweight history. Makhachev's been able to go toe-to-toe with them and get the better of them. Yes, he's had moments where he's been caught by Poirier, by Volkanovski, but in fights at the elite level, you are going to get caught. But the fact that he's been able to stand with these guys and strike his way into takedowns has just shown me that his striking has become world class. At the same time, with both Tsarukyan and Makhachev, you can argue that their striking looks so good, is so effective, because there's always the threat of the takedown on top of that. And I think that's a fair point. At the same time, the fact that these guys have been going toe-to-toe for rounds on end with the best strikers in the division does make me think that their striking is still at an elite level. However, we cannot talk about Islam Makhachev without talking about the grappling. I remember the old AKA videos where they'd show collegiate wrestlers, even high school wrestlers I think at one point, going up against the MMA fighters. After this video, if you've not seen these videos before, I can't quite remember the name of the channel, but make sure you take them out. It just shows Islam Makhachev's and Khabib's training in them as well, but it shows Islam Makhachev's range of takedowns. Honestly, the kind of stuff he can do that we've seen in the octagon as well. Judo throws, trips, double leg takedowns, the way he chains it all together is honestly almost like nothing we've seen before. Khabib was much more direct, much more aggressive, shooting for the double legs, getting people against the fence. Islam Makhachev seems to have even more diversity in his takedown threats. Against Charles Oliveira, He went for a really nice trip when they were both clinching against the fence. We've seen him get that golf club swing takedown on Dustin Poirier just before he finished the fight. He's got so many weapons when it comes to his takedowns that I just cannot wait for this fight. I know that it's going to be scramble heavy. There's going to be loads of takedowns, probably primarily from Makhachev. But I just think the level of skill you're going to see on demonstration in this fight is going to be on another level. It's interesting to note that I'm not the only person who has acknowledged the range of Islam Makhachev's takedowns. Arman Tsarukyan, in an interview, admitted as much. He said that whilst in freestyle wrestling, he'd probably give himself the edge. When it comes to grappling in the cage and everything that's associated with that, I think he said Makhachev's is more interesting. There's more to it, which is right. I don't think we've ever seen someone with such a range of takedowns. Typically, you'd see wrestlers favouring double legs, chain wrestling against the fence, judo guys going for throws and trips. But with Islam Makhachev, you've got a fighter who puts it all together with his striking, which makes him such a threat anywhere in the octagon. Against the fence, you're not safe. Out in the middle, you're not safe. He's just a takedown threat wherever you are in the octagon. So when you're looking at the strengths of Islam Makhachev, the list goes on and on and on. But there's one more thing. We've spoken about how much his striking's improved, how good his grappling is all round. But his game planning and the team he's got behind him, Khabib, aka, they always find a way to win. And this cannot be underestimated. Compared to the first time these two fought, Islam Makhachev and his team have got a lot of film study to be watching. This is really important. They'll be able to see times where Tsarukyan does lack concentration, see where he does leave himself open. Because as you can see, Makhachev's striking, he's become really defensively responsible with that as well. And he's not going to be easy to take down. So if they've done their homework, which I'm sure they have, if they've seen holes in Tsarukyan's game, Makhachev and his team could put together a perfect game plan where this fight doesn't look competitive at all. And I know this sounds all doom and gloom for Tsarukyan, so let's talk about Makhachev's weaknesses. And I'm not going to lie, if I was struggling to find weaknesses in Tsarukyan's game, finding weaknesses in Makhachev's game was near impossible. There's a couple of things that I did point out. Firstly, there have been question marks about his cardio, getting tired in the Volkanovski fight at the end of the Poirier fights. But there's two massive caveats for those. For the first Volkanovski fight, he only had 12 hours rehydration time. This is due to the time difference and being in Australia, so I can't quite say that his cardio is questionable based on that. And then against Poirier, there were a lot of rumours, and I'm not sure if his team confirmed it or not, that he had staff heading into that fight. So whilst I'd like to say that for Tsarukyan's sake, there are question marks about Makhachev's cardio, I'm not really prepared to bank on that. The other thing is that his team, Josh Thompson, who used to train with him, are kind of giving us the idea that he's only got a couple of years left in the sport, which is interesting. We know that Khabib retired early. Makhachev, he's in his early 30s. So if he's following a similar suit, he might be out the door soon as well. I know that it's a big weight cut for him to get down to lightweight. Could that cause any issues? Look, Tsarukyan's not small. I'm sure it's a massive weight cut for him as well. But really, when you're looking at the game of Islam Makhachev right now, there's a reason why he's the number one pound for pound fighter in the world right now. And that's because there aren't any real glaring holes in his game. He's great everywhere. If I'm really trying to pick something out, when he does throw his big overhand right, he really dips his head. And for a fighter like Tsarukyan, who loves a good kick through the middle, a knee through the middle like he caught Beneil Dariush with, that's a potential opening. That could happen. But I'm not prepared to say that his overhand right is a weakness, because we've seen it so many times, him going for that overhand right and going straight into a beautiful double leg takedown. So really, when it comes to weaknesses and what we're trying to point out from Makhachev, there are a couple of things conditioning wise, and if he's looking at leaving the sport soon, that might make you question it. But because of these lack of weaknesses, the onus is on Tsarukyan, just to be better than Makhachev. Make the fight be fought on his terms. And I'm going to say it again, and when there are moments in the rounds, because this is going to be tight, this is going to be technical, when there are moments in these rounds, make sure that Tsarukyan's the guy who's getting the judges to notice the work that he's doing. With that in mind, it's time to make a prediction and consider what's next for both fighters. Right now, I am leaning towards Islam Makhachev. I just think that he's got more ways to win. I know that I spoke at length about his takedown options and the diversity of attacks he's got from there, but I think that is a real sticking point for this fight. I think that if scrambles do happen, Makhachev has more ways of ending up on top. I think it is as simple as that. I don't think that he's going to stop Tsarukyan. If I was a betting man, I'd be going for Islam Makhachev by decision. I think that's the most likely outcome. But by no means am I saying this is going to be a walkover for Makhachev. I think Tsarukyan will have his moments. He is dangerous on the feet. If Makhachev at any point is irresponsible defensively, if he lets his guard down, Tsarukyan will be looking to connect with knees, with big hands through the middle, and he has got a lot of power for this weight class. The bottom line is that these two fighters aren't too dissimilar. The only problem for Tsarukyan is that Makhachev is better pretty much everywhere. This might be a hard pill for him to swallow, but unless he's made drastic improvements over the last year, then I think Makhachev is just going to edge it. I think he will get a unanimous decision on all the judges' scorecards. And unfortunately for him, I think that Tsarukyan's mission to defeat Makhachev will be put on hold. They could meet again, but I think in this meeting, Makhachev just has too much. So what would be next for both fighters? With Makhachev, I'm not too sure where he goes after this. I think that he's cleared out most of the top contenders. There's that sort of bubble of fighters who are nearing retirement. He could always have more fights with them, with potential Justin Gaethje. There's also options in other weight classes. Ilia Topuria said that he wants to come up. The Shavkat Rakhmonov fight could be interesting. I know that he probably won't fight Belal Muhammad, but there are options out there for Makhachev. For Tsarukyan, more contender fights. He's still only 28. He's got a lot of career left in him. He's still improving, which is really important. So even if he doesn't beat Makhachev this time, I still wouldn't put it past him to get UFC gold at some point. Anyway, guys, that's the video. We've gone on for quite a long time with this one. Let me know what you guys think, if you agree, and I'll see you guys later.